All right, the topic on investment really starts with the idea of what we call simple interest. Now, simple interest is an amount of money that is earned on investments. Now, it says here that simple interest is calculated on the full amount that is borrowed, or in this particular case, invested over a period of time. If it's borrowed, it's a loan, otherwise it is an investment. Now, the amount that's borrowed or the amount invested, it's the same thing really, is the principal. And the simple interest is also known as the flat rate of interest. You need to watch out for that, because sometimes questions are asked about whether it's flat rate, simple rate, compound interest. Flat rate and simple interest are exactly the same. The formula is one that I think most of you will know really well. It's done in previous courses. So this is the interest. Simple interest is the principal times the rate of interest, which is always expressed as a decimal, and n is the number of time periods. So the best way to learn this is just to get in and have a bit of a practice with the formula. So let's have a look at this first of all. It says calculate the simple interest on $5,000 at a flat rate of 8% per annum over 4 years. Well, we start with the formula. The interest rate, simple interest rather, is equal to P times R times N. P in this case is $5,000. The rate of interest is 8%, so we express that as a decimal by dividing by 100. So we get 0.08 is our value for R, and N is the number of time periods, and in this case it's 4 years. So our formula then can be used to work out the answer, the interest rate. I'm sorry, the simple interest, not the interest rate. The simple interest is the principal, that's $5,000, times the interest rate, 0.08, times the time period of 4. And when this is worked out, we get $1,600 as the amount of interest. So we could say therefore $1,600 is interest. So that's a very basic calculation. Let's have a look at another one. So in this particular case, I'll just move this over a little bit, there we go. We've got $2,000 invested and it's at 9.62%. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an interest rate that's a little bit different. So we start with the same formula. The simple interest, P times R times N. P is equal to $2,000. The interest rate R is equal to 9.62 divided by 100, which is equal to 0.0962, and you need to keep those numbers, don't round them. And N is equal to 3 years. So our calculation, the amount of simple interest is $2,000 times by our rate of interest, 0.0962, times by the number of time periods. So the answer is $577.20 interest. So there's our interest. Remember, we're not working out the total amount, it's just the interest that has been earned. Alright, let's have a look at some questions about the other types of questions that could be asked. I'm going to move this up the page a little bit so that we can see it and have a bit more room. So let's have a look at this. An investment pays 5% interest per annum. So investing your money, you get 5% per annum interest. The first question says, express this as a decimal. Well, the rate is equal to 5%. So if we divide that by 100, we get 0.05 as our interest rate as a decimal. Okay, remember we get 5%. and we take it and divide it by 100 to get our answer. Alright, now the next question asks us, find the 6 monthly interest rate as a percentage and as a decimal. So let's write this down. The 6 months is half a year. Now I know that seems obvious, but it's a really important way of looking at it. Half a year. So that means therefore that the rate would be equal to our percentage divided by 2, which is equal to 2.5%, and as a decimal that is 0.025. So that there is our 6 monthly interest rate, 6 monthly interest rate as a percentage and also as a decimal. C, find the quarterly interest rate. This would be the same thing. So a quarter of a year is 3 months. So another way of looking at it is to look at it in terms of the months. Now, a quarter, there's 4 quarters in a year, so 4 is the number that we need. So the rate would be equal to our annual rate, 5%, and we just divide that by 4 because we've got 4 lots of quarters. So that comes down to 1.25%, and rounding that to a decimal is 0.0125. I think I said rounding it to a decimal. You actually don't round it, you just change it into a decimal. And then our last question is find the monthly interest rate as a percentage and as a decimal. So there are 12 months in a year. Okay, so therefore our rate would be equal to 5% divided by 12. Now, in this case, we end up with a decimal as a percentage. So we've got this number comes in as 14666 ... percent. But we can't write that down. Let's move this up a little more. So we actually need to round it. So we're going to round it with quite a number of decimal places. In this case, 1.467%, and we better indicate that this is to 4 decimal places. All right, so that's what we would have to round it at some stage. And then remember, that's a percent. You've got to be careful you don't think that's the decimal. That's actually the percentage. So the decimal looks like this: 0.001467, and we're going to do this to 4 significant figures rather than saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal places. We've done it to 4 significant figures, and this is now as a decimal. So there's some good skills that you need to know in order to do these questions. Alright, just a couple more things to do before we finish off this lesson, and that's to take this. The units of R and N must be the same, both in years or both in months. If you've got a situation where you've got something done, see, this is done for 16 months, the interest rate is a per annum interest rate. So if that's the case, we've got to do something about bringing these into line. So let's have a look at this one. It says calculate the simple interest on $3,000, and there it is, a flat rate of 8.53% over 16 months. So we start with the same formula, I is equal to PRN, and we say P is equal to $3,000. That doesn't change. The interest rate is equal to 8.53 divided by 12, because we're going to make this a monthly rate. There it is there. That's why we divide it by 12, and now we're going to turn it into a decimal by dividing it by 100. Now you might need to make a note about this. So this has got to become a monthly interest rate, and that's done by dividing by 12, and then that's as a decimal. So the interest rate is 0.007,108 3333, and that's per month. And we're going to keep it with all those decimals. That's virtually the full calculator display, so we don't make any mistakes with rounding. And we've got our value of n for 16 months. We can actually leave that in months now because we've done our interest rate in months. So our conclusion is therefore that the interest is equal to $3,000 times by our rate of interest. So that's that up there. Let's make sure we write it down properly. 0.071083333 times by 16, which comes to $341.20 if we round it off. So that's our interest there. Okay, now one last question. We'll look at simple interest graphs in a later lesson, but let's have a look at this last question. We've got $3,500 invested for 3 years, and the amount of interest is $735. What must be the interest rate? All right, so let's start with our formula. I is equal to PRN. Now let's substitute in what we know. The interest rate is, the amount of interest is $735. We don't calculate that. That's given to us. We know that $3,500 is invested. What we don't know is the rate of interest. We do know that it's done for 3 years. So we've got to rearrange this formula. So let's just work out what we can. We're going to take the 3,500 and multiply it by the 3. So that gives us 10,500 times the interest rate. Now using algebra, you can see that the rate of interest must be 735 divided by 10500, which turns out to be 0.07. Now that's as a decimal. Therefore, as a percentage rate, we take the decimal and just times it by 100 to get the percentage. And therefore our answer here is an interest rate of 7%. So there's an example of how to find the some of the missing numbers in here if we are already given the amount of interest. You need to practice these until they become very easy. They're quite simple to do, but they do require practice in order to make sure you master the idea.